Okay, Geometry for Mr. Fry. I'm going through that Jeopardy PowerPoint review. This is slide 13. Slide 13 asks, what is the midpoint of a line? And you could say a point halfway on the line, or a point that divides the line in two equal sections. And then when you get to number 14, you have, a midpoint, and then you have, this equation and this equation. And those are going to equal then if that was the midpoint that is on that diagram. And then you just solve for x. This is supposed to be x here. And you get x equals 6. You solve that equation. Same thing for 15. Pretty much, yeah, so you figure out what x equals. And then he throws in this little thing in here. The whole thing is fh equals 6y minus 2. And find y, so substitute that value in for x, and then you got to double it because that was the midpoint, remember? So the whole thing, fh, the whole thing equals 46. So that 6y minus 2 is going to equal 46. Just solve for y equals 8. Finding the midpoint for two points that are given. So from this point to this point, you're going to take your x1 plus your x2. So that's your 7 and your 9. Yep, 7 and your 9. And then your y's is -5 plus a -1, which is just -1. And so your point for point G and H, your midpoint would be, the midpoint x value is 8, the midpoint y value is -3. So if you were to, graph that, you would find that the midpoint of those 2 points, if you were to draw a line, would be right at 8, -3. 17, they throw a kink in it and they give us like the answer. It's find the coordinates of j if k is -5, 10. Now is the midpoint of JL, and L has the coordinates of -8, 6. So we don't know what that first x value is, but I know what they would equal if you would add it to the next x value divided by 2. So I'm going to just solve. I end up solving. I multiplied, solve for x. I end up multiplying by 2 both sides, and then I add 8. So I get x equals -2. So that's my x coordinate. And then I figure out my y. I didn't know the first one, but I knew the second one, and I knew what the midpoint was. I multiply everything by 2, and then I subtract 6 from both sides, and y equals 14. 18, you're finding the next 3 terms of the sequence. Notice that sequence is subtracting 7 each time. So just keep subtracting 7, keep subtracting 7. And then number 19, notice that each term is squared. So the first term is squared, second term is squared, third term is squared, fourth term is squared. Fifth, if you square 5, you get 25, square 6, square 7. That is the pattern there. Number 20 says write a conjecture for 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Notice that when you take, take these two, that gives you the third one. Then take these two, that gives you the fourth one. Add these two, and that gives you the fifth one. So if you add these two, that would give you 8. So what you're doing is you're adding, and the way I wrote it is, you keep adding the last 2 in the sequence to get the next consecutive number. So just, add the last 2. That gives you the next number. So now you got a new last 2. So, you would add, in that sequence, you'd add 8 plus 5, and you get 13. Then you'd add 13 plus 8, and so on. 21. It says to determine if the following conjecture is true, dividing by 2 always results in a number less than the original number. Well, not true. I just grabbed -2 divided by 2 gives you -1. -1 is more than -2, so it's not true. 22, they have a similar statement. If a rectangle is 6 meters squared, the dimensions must be 2 by 3. No, not true. It could be 1.5 times 4 is 6 also. 1 times 6 is 6 also. For 23, what two things do you need for a conditional statement? You need an if and then, or your hypothesis and conclusion. If this, then the conclusion then. P and Q. Mind your P's and Q's. 24. What two things are needed to create a biconditional? So for 24, you need two true conditional statements. Converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the statement, if you live in Nashville, then you live in Tennessee. So the converse is if you live in Tennessee, then you live in Nashville. Okay, I may have to pause that. Then the inverse is if you do not live in Nashville, then you do not live in Tennessee. And the contrapositive is if you do not live in Tennessee, then you do not live in Nashville. 26. Almost there. Write a biconditional statement for the following conditional statement. If two angles are supplementary, then the sum of those angles is 180. So I'm going to write a biconditional statement. So two angles are supplementary if and only if the sum of those two angles is 180. That's the biconditional. 27. Write the conditional statement and converse of the following biconditional. I wear my snow boots if and only if it snows. So if I wear my snow boots, then it snows. That's the conditional. Sounds kind of backwards, but that's the conditional in that order. And then the converse would be flipped around. If it snows, then I wear my snow boots. That sounds a little bit better. That's 27. 28. So use the law of detachment to make a conclusion. So the conclusion would be, if you are 18 years old and you can't vote, Olivia is not 18 years old, so Olivia can't vote is the conclusion. In 29, use the law of syllogism to make a conclusion if possible. So if a number is divided by 12, then it is divisible by 6. If a number is divisible by 6, then it is divisible by 3. So then syllogism would say, so if a number is divisible by 12, then it is divisible by 3. That's good. 30. This determine which law was used to make the conclusion, if any. If you go camping, then you will need a flashlight. If you need a flashlight, then you need to bring extra batteries. So the conclusion, if you go camping, you will need to bring extra batteries. And that would be the law of syllogism. 31. Determine if the following is a good definition. A rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent angles. Well, that could be a square too. So no, it's not, conclusive. So it so is a square. I put as my reason for no. And then 32, last one. What are the two laws and what do they state? So the law of detachment. If P is to Q is true and P is true, then that means Q is true. So the syllogism is if P is to Q and Q is to R, then P is to R will be true. Okay, hopefully this helps. If you need more help, make sure you're zooming in with me.